Namaskar and welcome to NatStrat Conversations. My name is PankajSaran. I welcome you to another episode where we bring you conversations on geopolitics, national security, technology, and everything else. Welcome once again. It's that time of the year when we have to take stock of the year gone by, 2024, and try to look ahead into 2025. Our attempt is to make some sense of what 2024 was all about and what awaits us for 2025. To discuss these issues, I have with me today a very distinguished guest, Ambassador PS Raghavan, who is chairman of the National Security Advisory Board. Ambassador Raghavan has been associated in one form or the other with the NSAB for the last 8 years and has been chairing the board for the last few years. He's earlier been an ambassador, including to Russia, and extremely well versed in all matters relating to geopolitics, foreign policy, and national security. So he's actually been in the heart of the national security decision-making apparatus. And so I want to sit with him today and ask him, firstly, what he thinks about what has been the last 12 months, how 2024 has evolved, and what can we expect for 2025. So Raghavan, warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Pankaj. It's great to be with you again. Thanks.
Thank you. In a cold December evening.
Absolutely.
So I want to begin by asking you that taking stock is always easier than predicting the future, but sometimes it helps to predict the future if we get it right in hindsight. So some people say that 2024 was a year of turbulence. Lots of words have been used of chaos, of war, of nationalism, pursuit of national interests, a preoccupied and a internally divided United States, a defiant Russia, a slowing China, a Europe in trouble, an ascendant global South, and above all, the United Nations missing in action. So just to start off, kickstart the global, and then we can come down to the regional. Your initial thoughts?
I think you're absolutely right. You gave a long description. I would say all of the above, except that I would say not all the above were negative. Some of them had positive elements to it. But if you were to describe it from security terms, 2024, from a global perspective, you would have to call it an Annus horribilis. Look at the war in Ukraine, which has claimed more lives and more destruction in 24 than before. Look at West Asia, destruction of life and property in Gaza of the Palestinians. And we are not even talking about the various wars and conflicts and displacements that are taking place in Africa.
Correct.
They just have fallen off the radar. And then you, of course, have a much stronger Russia-NATO confrontation. You have verbal skirmishes with China. And of course, I mean, what you're talking about, political dysfunction within the US, that's a US problem, which I think now, with the elections over, hopefully is behind us. You talked about nationalism. I think nationalism is a natural consequence of how the world order has developed after the Cold War. So some of these things are elements which have positive connotations to them, but in terms of a hopelessly divided world, a hopelessly conflicted world, and what I would say the absence of any world order, 24 was very bad. But you look at it from an Indian prism. If you look at it from a more narrow Indian prism, the year wasn't bad at all for us. You know, we did well economically. We stuck to our goals, which is that of growth and development and security for ourselves. If you look at our major partnerships, you look at the United States, we made progress in a number of areas: economic, technological, defense. Of course, a number of wrinkles developed in the relationship over the last half of the year. It's well known. Hopefully, we will find solutions to them. But the point is, in spite of that, the overall picture, I would say, is positive. Similarly with Russia, we resisted the pressures to turn away from Russia. We strengthened our warm relationship, which from our perspective is based on geography, economics, and security.
Right.
And I think we have to stick to that if we have to make progress in the areas that we want. And even in terms of China, the third great power, I think we have largely had an element of stability. Our trade and economic engagement has in fact increased a lot in the last year. And of course, the icing on the cake was the meeting that NSA had with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, Special Representative Wang Yi, which I think showed a very promising prospects for a way forward. So, a number of these elements, including our relationship with the global south, our relationship with what I call the middle powers, which is actually a characteristic of the new post-Cold War order, which is not fully recognized. All of these, I think, spells for India a positive 2024, where we managed to shield ourselves from the the various buffets of wind that came against us.
So that's a great overview. Let me draw you out on some specifics of some of these issues. The main attention of the world actually was on the US election, on the Trump. You've done a lot of work on what the Trump administration might look like. So some comments on that, because the preoccupation in the last almost 10 months of the global system was on the US election. I mean, the Russians were watching, the Chinese were watching, the West Asians were watching.
Europeans, most
the
of
Europeans. So a little bit on that.
Actually, before I go to that, you talked about the various issues in 2024. I think one thing which is missing in all our analysis of what is happening in 2024 and before that as well is a proper framework, an analytical framework.
Absolutely.
Of the world order.
Yeah.
Now, people talk about the global world order. The global world order is a nebulous concept. There was a world order that existed during the Cold War. It's a world order which we were happy to say goodbye to because it didn't do as much benefit. Then you had this period, this post-Cold War of this 10 years of unipolarity where people said that liberal democracy will spread around the world.
Correct.
I think what we have not understood, and particularly us in India, but certainly the Western world as well, is that in the 21st century, let us say 21st century, the strategic geography of various regions of the world have changed. And what you see, and I'll come to Trump. Actually, Trump shows a better understanding of the new strategic geography than many of the others. What has happened? After the period when Soviet Union was weak and Russia collapsed, Russia itself became very weak. Look at Europe. NATO expanded, the European Union expanded, the Soviet space contracted. Now, what resulted, therefore, is a new strategic geography in Europe. It is the lack of recognition and dealing with that has led to issues like the Ukraine war and so on. Look at West Asia. In West Asia, the Americans withdrew for whatever reason. They yielded strategic space to others. So the Russians came in, the Chinese came in, the Iranians came in. Also, these countries in the Gulf increased in their own strength. So again, the strategic geography of that region changed. Asia Pacific, or we should call it the Indo-Pacific. Again, what happened? The original Cold War construct was an American nuclear umbrella over its allies against the Soviet Union.
Right.
Today, you have suddenly transformed it and said that, this is actually against China. And therefore, when China's maritime ambitions you saw expanding, you then had to look at a larger geography of Indo-Pacific, which is what brings us into it.
So when you talk about, let's say, the Western Alliance, the Transatlantic Alliance on the one side, and the Indo-Pacific on the other side, the real issue, of course, is, the Biden administration talked about the world between democracy and autocracy. And that had very few buyers and takers in the world. But one of the fallouts, I think, in 2024, we are seeing the seeds of it. It may develop, and your thoughts are welcome on the resilience and the future of this transatlantic alliance in Europe, and how much of European buy-in will we see in the US pivot or Trump's reset of policy towards the Indo-Pacific, given Europe's own relations with China and a clear differentiation between how Europe views China and how Europe views Russia?
Yeah. You know, the Biden administration tried very hard to make NATO not only a transatlantic but also an Indo-Pacific power. I don't think that is practical. That effort was before the Russia-Ukraine war started. With the Russia-Ukraine war raging, the Europeans are even less inclined. As you said, there are different views on... You see, you ask Europe to withdraw from Russia, to withdraw from China. Where will they go?
Yeah.
So, there are different views and different parts of Europe have different views on China.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. I think the idea of NATO being a transatlantic, going beyond a transatlantic remit into the Pacific, I think that's not really very practical. But think of another area, the Arctic. Opening up strategic space of great military interest to everybody around. Arctic Council has who? The Arctic Council has 8 members, 7 of whom are NATO and the 8th one is Russia.
Correct.
Russia owns the largest piece of maritime real estate in the Arctic.
Correct.
So, it is not unreasonable to think of NATO becoming also an Arctic defense alliance in addition to Atlantic, and that would be more contiguous to its area and more, I think, aligned with its own defense interests.
So, will the United States look for NATO-type partners in the Indo-Pacific, apart from the Europeans? I mean, is that where we come in?
Actually, that is what the Biden administration appeared to be heading towards. It appears to me that the Trump administration has not indicated any such objective. You will see that in statements of President-elect Trump, India being part of a defense alliance in the Indo-Pacific does not figure at all. Go further. If you take Project 2025,
that's the Heritage Foundation.
They would say it's actually 50 think tanks together which did it. It's not just the Heritage Foundation. This time it was a very large venture. And by the way, many who wrote or contributed to Project 2025 are now in the Trump administration. But if you look at it as a policy guide, it talks about Japan, Australia, and countries of East Asia joining together to form, along with Taiwan, of course, joining together to have a defense structure there. No mention of India there. I mean, it's unrealistic to think of India as part of an alliance there. I mean, you have China on your border, physically next to you. You do not form an alliance to defend an area which is well beyond the perimeter of that. So I don't think that's practical. It won't fly.
Okay. So we've discussed the US. I want to actually, since we are on the European theatre, and maybe if we can skip to a little future gazing, what do you think are the prospects of settlement on Ukraine, and what kind of a time frame do you think we should be looking at?
You know, President Trump, when he was candidate, Trump said that I'll solve this problem in 24 hours, even before I take over. A little later, it became that he'll solve it in 24 hours after he takes over. The other day, he said in a press conference when talking about the Middle East, as they call it the Middle East, and other problems of the world, he said Ukraine is far more difficult. You see, the problem in Ukraine is that both sides have painted themselves into a corner from which they'll find it very difficult to get out of. If you talk about a ceasefire and a freeze, it is equal unhappiness to both. Ukraine says, I've lost 20% of territory. Russia says, I've not gained anything that I set out to gain, which is actually security guarantees. So, and take in addition to that, and this is what presumably has now been sort of impressed upon the US by the Europeans. This Russia-Ukraine war is not a game of interests of Russia and Ukraine alone. much that you might talk about agency of Ukraine, the Americans are very greatly interested in the outcome and the nature of the outcome. European states have different ideas of what is a successful outcome. If you look at Western Europe, if you look at Central Europe, you look at the Baltic states. So it's not at all clear how you're going to look at a settlement which will happen, certainly not within the first 2 or 3 months. It's very difficult to see.
But I mean, it's now accepted through various surveys that the views of the Democrats and the views of the Republicans in the US on Russia-Ukraine war are very different. In terms of threat perceptions and priorities, all surveys, including Pew and everyone else, is indicating, and Republicans by their own measure say that for the Republicans, the priority of the Ukraine war is much less than it is for the Democrats.
I wouldn't say that entirely, because even within the Republican Party, there is still a significant group of people who really believe that giving up on Ukraine is giving up on a vital American interest. There is another group which feels very strongly that we're wasting money on Ukraine and that we should leave it to the Europeans. It has been assumed that Trump actually cleaves to the second stream of opinion. But whatever the stream of opinion, you cannot start your administration seeming to lose a war. So you still have to find a solution which has reasonable acceptability to all the stakeholders concerned. And that is why I say that it is difficult, because they have painted themselves into a corner. If right from the beginning you have said that I want the strategic defeat of Russia and a victory for Ukraine as the only outcome, difficult to see how you can get that today.
True.
But eventually, I would say that what the Republicans are broadly united on, and what Trump has been saying all along, is that the outcome you need to look at is a European security architecture in which Russia and Europe have to jointly coexist. In other words, you can't exclude the largest European country from a security architecture and pretend it's a security architecture. So I think that is a broad concept that is accepted. We need to see how to reach that.
But one of the takeaways from 2024, the 12 months, has been the great cost that Europe has had to pay because of the war. Europe is in big trouble. I think as we end 2024 and compare it to the start of 2024, in the 12 months, Europe has actually faced a lot of problems, and it is weaker today in many ways than it was at the start of this year.
That's very true, but Europeans will not like me saying this, but Europe has been in relative decline for a much longer period. You know, if you don't need to quote me, you can quote President Macron, who has given a very detailed picture and very bitter picture of what is happening in Europe. So Europe has a long way to go to restore its position. And the other thing, as I said, about the European security architecture, if that's going to happen, again, Europe has to spend a lot of money on defense. Money that it doesn't have today.
So Europe is challenged.
Europe is deeply challenged, and it has to find a way out of this. Macron said that it requires trillions of dollars to... they don't have a military-industrial complex.
Correct.
They're buying everything from America. Now, you can't have a kind of an autonomous region like Europe without your own security.
Let me shift to a neighboring part of the world, which has been up in flames. I mean, West Asia. I mean, the developments in West Asia have been extraordinary. I mean, Yemen, the Houthis, Sudan, the Red Sea, Gaza, West Bank, the Hezbollah, the killing of Haniyeh, the killing of Nasrallah, Syria now, Iran. It's all happening. Someone said we are talking about an Israeli order in the Middle East. Any comments on how this 12-month period, starting from 7th October last year, has panned out?
I think the most important point to remember is that history did not start from October 7th. Actually, the West Asian situation was progressing rather nicely beyond anyone's expectations in the few years before 2024.
Absolutely.
You saw the Abraham Accords, which actually exhibited the desire of many of these Gulf countries to leave the past baggage behind and to develop relations with Israel, on the clear understanding that that is the most powerful country in that region. That was going on well. The Chinese, out of nowhere, managed to broker a deal between the Saudis and Iran. The Americans did a prison swap deal with Iran, giving them $6 billion of their own money, but everyone pretended it was money that they were giving to Iran. That doesn't matter. So, if you look at the totality of that, it looked towards West Asia was really proceeding towards a new dawn. They forgot one thing. They forgot the Palestinians. So, if you look at it, I would say they forgot also that Iran to suitably accommodate Iran's issues.
Yeah.
It's of course ironical that, just when the two-state solution is receded far into the background, everybody is talking about a new two-state solution. Yeah. But so eventually, you are looking at all these various issues, they all emerge from a few issues. And if you tackle those few issues, I don't think West Asian peace is that far away. And the fact that President Trump is a great friend of Prime Minister Netanyahu, I think is a positive element. He will have greater leverage because the Biden administration had no leverage over him.
But so, he's inheriting West Asia, where you have Syria, you have Iraq, you have Libya, and you have Iran. And there is no concept of a centrist, Arabist, secular force. I mean, they are all in different shades of either Shia or Sunni radical control. And are we on the brink of another caliphate? Or, there is worry about the resurgence of the ISIS. It's very complicated. I mean, the Turks feel they have got more influence. The Israelis are happy with the departure of Bashar and the kind of how they've decimated both Hamas and Hezbollah. But in place of all these regimes and all, what you have is a very different kind of scenario for Israel in the region.
No, that is right. But if you say that, will we achieve a secular, centralizing force in West Asia? I don't think actually will do so, because the entire, again, I come back to the post-Cold War world, the way it has developed. It is not conducive to amalgamation. It is actually more conducive to atomization.
Yeah.
So, and of course, I think Syria is one should really look at Syria in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war. Really speaking, if you look at it, there are a lot of pressures that are being put on Russia in different ways, since you can't do it on the battlefield. The killing of the nuclear forces general, not only that, there is action and counteraction. So, you look from Romania to Georgia to Chechnya to Syria. These are struggles which are, I think, have a different origin. Syria, this is not the last word that has been spoken on Syria.
I want to shift a little bit now to another main event or trend we saw in 2024, which was the resurgence or the revitalization of the global south, as epitomized in the expansion of the BRICS. You went from 5 members to 9 members. And it has happened really fast, much faster than most people expected. Any comments on why and what it means?
If you look at the Western media and Western analysis, they sneer at the global south, and they say there is, and many of our commentators as well. Absolutely. It's not just the Western world.
Correct.
Basically, what is this global south? It's just a bunch of people who have who have disparate ideologies, disparate interests, and so on. I think we need to look at the global south, and that is the third element of the post-Cold War development which I was talking about. We need to look at the global south not as a group of people with aligned objectives, but the rest. Look at them as not the West.
Yeah.
So as somebody said, the West versus the rest.
Yeah.
So the global south is a group of people who do not accept that the solutions of a Western global order or a liberal democracy, a global liberal democracy, They do not accept it. They pursue their own interests. But this is what has happened, in a number of areas because of the opening up of the post-Cold War.
Yeah.
You've had globalization, you have technology revolutions, because of which you've had the free movement of people, of goods, of ideas, of money around the world. It has given a number of countries greater strength, economic heft, military strength, regional influence, for many countries to say that, look, I can now have control over my future much more than I had before. So if there is a rules-based order, I don't accept something called a rules-based order that somebody is telling me. I should participate in making it. So when you look at the global south, you talk about it, or when you come to the BRICS, for example, what are these people doing? These people are, I don't think they're railing against a Western-led, US-led Western order. They're basically expressing their desire to be strategically autonomous. They don't buy, as you yourself said, they don't buy this thesis of democracy versus authoritarianism. They don't buy this thesis of people that say that we make the rules, you abide by them. So this is an expression of, and political hedging, before Trump comes, you need to. So it's not, they really defied this whole thesis narrative of the isolation of Russia, the isolation of Putin, and stood there in a photograph
in Kazan.
in Kazan. And mind you, Turkey was also there as one of the outreach countries, as a NATO country. So I would say that this global south and the so-called, they call New Northern Alliance, some people call them middle powers, these are all people whose fundamental idea is to improve their well-being and not to accept narratives which basically suit the West, which is how they see the Ukraine war.
Also, they also see the utter helplessness and ineffectiveness of the United Nations and the architecture of international governance. And I just want briefly for you to comment on that. I think if 2024 has to be remembered, it will not only be remembered for the chaos, but also for the fact that there was no one there, out there in the wider world, to actually stop the chaos or to find solutions to the chaos. And the United Nations and its associated structures were missing in action.
That's simply because the United Nations is a moribund organization in today's world. I mean, it is an organization that was created for 5 guys to keep peace in the rest of the world. I mean, if you talk about the Security Council, for example, it is not representative anymore of the world. So if the United Nations Security Council can pass resolutions right, left and center, there's nobody willing to abide by it. And I think you need to be looking for a new template again. If it's a United Nations, it has to be a United Nations that is more representative. Otherwise, it will not work. And systems of, WTO has collapsed. Other systems of globalization have fallen victim to nationalism that you said, which is sometimes couched in national security perspectives and so on. We need to look at all these structures. We don't have a structure which is fit for purpose today.
Let me now shift a little bit to closer home, which is the region. And the region, of course, is large because we are large. But there we have China, and we can discuss a little bit of how you saw China behave through 2024, what we can expect in 25. And then I want to also talk to you a little bit about the neighborhood, the immediate neighborhood, the subcontinent. So on China, it seems in this middle of all this turbulence of 2024, China was also relatively quiet. That's my sense. They seem to have taken a bit of a back seat, allowed these other conflicts we have discussed to grab the headlines. They're suffering from a slowdown. Is that, would you agree with that reading of China in this?
Well, yes, somewhat. The point is that China has, after all, China did broker a Saudi-Iran deal. And China has not shirked from expressing its ambitions abroad. Only recently they were there. Xi Jinping was there in Peru and Brazil and got a huge reception. And China continues to expand its influence in West Asia, in Africa, and Latin America, as we saw recently. I think what we have not seen of China is the more abrasive and aggressive face of it, which I think has to do with 2 things. One is, of course, the fact that it now needs the outside world because of its economic situation. and B, the ubiquitous Donald Trump. I think everyone is waiting to see what President Trump does. And many developments over the last 6 months can be attributed to either fear or expectation of President Trump.
So, of course, next year we will is full of expectation about how this US-China relationship will proceed. I mean, on the one hand, you have Donald Trump saying that he will not enter into any new wars. So, presumably that means no new wars in the Indo-Pacific also. But on the other hand, his whole policy is heavily focused on China, and part of that is to make America great again, etc. So perhaps this is going to be the biggest relationship to watch out for us.
Most certainly. One is a strong strategic partner of India. The other is India's major strategic challenge. And relations between them will obviously impact on us in a number of ways. But talking about wars, one of the things that Trump has done, yes, he's very clearly said that he's not going to put his troops into battle.
Yeah.
He has also, in his various campaign utterances, and once again, if you look at the Project 2025, the confrontation with China on Taiwan does not really occupy much space. Essentially, they're looking at China as a major strategic rival to the United States and how to win this rivalry. Now, where it will affect us, we have to see, of course, tariffs on China, what impact it has on us, in a number of ways. One is that, you'll have to look for whether China diverts products which are uncompetitive in the US to us, and what happens. There is also this thing, there's a lot of talk about China plus one.
Yeah.
Depending on the attitude that the Trump administration takes on the industries in China, because one of the things Trump says is that I don't want you to be there at all. I want you to base yourself in the Western Hemisphere, in South America. So, if that pressure starts acting, then China plus one also ceases to have that much salience for us. I'm talking about for us. But of course, I must also say, rather than looking at it from a negative sense, we should look at it from a positive sense also. The agreement that was reached, which was published yesterday, I think is an enormously significant one if it really is carried through. You see, it talked about peace and tranquility. That is some language from 1993 to 1996. It talked about the special representative, of course, that is 2003 and Nathula.
Yeah.
And then it talked about 2005.
Yes.
The political parameters, which is a remarkable document actually. It fell through.
Then in that case, if we are entering 2025 and you're suggesting that we may see more on the India-China front at a time when you have the United States pursuing a totally different approach to China, how are we going to sit together with the US, China, India?
No, there is a challenge there. It depends on how the Quad, for example, develops. If you remember, when Donald Trump in his first administration was very aggressive in Quad.
Yes.
In fact, that was a time when not a single Quad joint statement could be issued at the apex level, simply because the other countries were uncomfortable with what the Americans wanted to put in. We have to wait and see. Eventually also the American dependence on critical supplies from China is still huge.
Absolutely.
So their disengagement is not going to happen tomorrow morning, even if it were to happen. So you're looking at a period of lead time. As far as we are concerned, we should continue to try to build on this modus vivendi we've got. We cannot be deflected from this by other developments.
So it's very interesting that as Trump takes office in January, he's coming in at a time when the India-China relationship is actually emerging from cold freeze. So we are on the ascendant in a sense with China, whereas he's coming with all guns blazing against China.
Well, actually, the Biden administration have contributed a bit to the way in which we made up with China. I'll leave it at that. I don't want to expand on it. But that may also be the case. But let's face it, we have to do what we have to do with our neighbor. And if there are adjustments to be made, we have to make those adjustments. But let us not presuppose those adjustments and therefore not do what we have to do.
Correct. Now, let me just switch to the neighborhood subcontinent. I was just before we got into this conversation, 7 of our neighbors, out of the 7 have had changes of government in 2024. And I just quickly reel them out for the benefit of all the viewers. Pakistan, Maldives, Sri Lanka, Mauritius, Nepal, Bhutan, and of course the last is Bangladesh. And out of these, 5 were constitutional, peaceful, they happened through elections. 2 out of the 2, that is Pakistan and Bangladesh, Pakistan election January 2024 was a highly mixed affair in terms of credibility. And of course, Bangladesh, we know what happened. So 2024 was not exactly an easy year for Indian policy to the neighborhood, right?
Yes and no. Because you named 7 of them.
And I forgot, by the way, Myanmar, which is a separate case altogether.
Which for some reason people don't often include among neighbors. I would say that they have been through difficulties, they have been through democratic or non-democratic or partially democratic changes of government. But we have managed to maintain broadly our equities in those countries. And I think that is one success of our neighborhood policy, that we have made our relations not as people keep on saying, the media keeps on talking about leader-to-leader relationships. They are useful. But we have dependencies that we have created, mutual dependencies that we have created. And you've seen this. You've seen this with Maldives. You are seeing this in Sri Lanka. You have seen it with other countries.
Yeah.
It hasn't happened with Bangladesh, but give it time. Bangladesh hasn't even settled down.
Correct.
I would actually say, from a neighborhood perspective, that this is where the US relationship becomes very important. For a long time, we had an understanding with the US about our neighborhood, to the extent that the US was cooperating with us in maintaining stability in our neighborhood. That, not to put too fine a point on it, broke down in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
What we need to be doing is, and again, if you look at Project 2025, the view of India's neighborhood that it shows, I think we should welcome. Whether they do it or not is a different issue. But they say that we need to deal with Pakistan as a terrorist supporting state. They say we cannot overlook Afghanistan's terrorist origins. They've not talked about Bangladesh because it hadn't happened when they wrote it. But essentially, they talk about cooperation with India in maintaining stability in the South Asian subcontinent region. If that happens, that would be very good, and that will really strengthen India-US cooperation very strongly, because that will add a new politico-strategic dimension to India-US relations.
Myanmar, of course, we didn't discuss, but it really is a huge issue, right? With the combination of Myanmar and Bangladesh in the northeast, and then with what's happening inside Manipur, is not a good situation. I mean, it will require all our effort to see that we protect our national security.
No, that's very true. Leaving Manipur aside as an internal security issue, I think Bangladesh, which will of course impact also on our northeast, dealing with Bangladesh is our most immediate neighborhood problem for national security. Now, the way in which this is peculiar. the way in which you suddenly have the whole world wakes up and says Bangladesh has a legitimate government makes a mockery of democracy. So what you need to change, if you don't like the leader, what you need to change government is to get on top of the presidential palace and you get into office and everybody accepts it. So this is something that we need to work towards, and we need the US buy-in on this as well. Because what is happening in Bangladesh is not good for anybody, including Bangladesh or US or except perhaps, not even China, but I'm not so sure of that.
No, I think we basically need to have a free and fair election at the earliest in Bangladesh.
So easier said than done.
I know.
When you break up a government the way it is done, it has been done. I think free and fair elections are very difficult to organize and to be accepted as free and fair.
So, 2025 is upon us. How do you then, in the light of what we have discussed, see from your prism as the most important, the most pressing challenges? One, of course, is the geopolitics, managing the geopolitics and the relationships with the major powers. But I know you've spent a lot of time in the NSAB on technology, on hybrid threats, on making India resilient from all points of view. Any thoughts from you on how you would see from a broader national security perspective?
This is exactly what we need to focus on. When you look at your foreign policy, we need to focus on what our national goals and national priorities are. And they center around economic growth, development, security, technology adequacy, as my colleague Dr. Radhakrishnan, the NSAB says, technology adequacy, and a strong military-industrial complex. I would say these are the goals that India requires in order to reach Vikasit Bharat in 2047. Your foreign policy has to be an adjunct to this set of goals. So you need to get countries to facilitate this to the extent possible, resist efforts to impede this, because that is what we've seen in recent months, efforts to impede it. So if you look at it, that is the goal. You set your economic policy, economic goals, national ambitions and national goals in front of you, and deal with the world in such a way as to promote your national goals.
And so I think we are entering 2025 in an environment which is pretty uncertain, right? And so we have to be really much more focused, precisely because of the uncertainty. And we don't know what a White House will look like. We are now moving forward with China. We have an unstable neighborhood. So in the light of all this, and of course we have this current government in India, which is going up to 2029. So there is that political stability. So all of these are factors which are going to influence how we look at. So are you optimistic, pessimistic, hopeful about 2025? Is it going to be better than 2024 for India?
For India, I am optimistic. As I said, though 2024 was an annus horribilis for the world, India has managed to navigate these waters pretty well. And I think if we keep before us our national goals as the lodestar, we should be able to do further navigation in a similar way. And there is no reason why we should not keep progressing the way we've been progressing. And all these, you say occupant of the White House, what happens in Russia, Ukraine, what happens in China. These are all, geopolitics is not black or white. There are shades of grey. And you have to navigate those, deal with those shades of grey.
Well, thank you so much, Raghavan. That's been a fantastic tour de horizon of some very, very complex issues which don't readily, are not amenable to easy answers and solutions. But I think you've given a really good perspective on these issues. And maybe we will have a review sometime next year to see where we stand on all these issues. But thank you so much for taking time from a very busy schedule. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much. Thanks. A great pleasure to be here with you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Dear viewers, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation with Ambassador PS Raghavan. Chairman of the National Security Advisory Board of India. We discussed a wide canvas of issues, looking at 2024, giving a little preview of 2025. The world is not easy. It's complex, more complex than we would like. But I think, as Ambassador Raghavan is saying, India has steered the course, and this gives us confidence that we will continue to do so in 2025. Thank you so much for joining us. Till we meet again, goodbye and namaskar.